The public portion of session of this hearing will resume, and I believe while we were deliberating in camera, we have formulated a decision with reasons for decision. Mr. Member O'Callaghan, can you read the motion?
Moved by myself, Peter O'Callaghan. Be it resolved that the committee issues the following decisions and reasons. Upon receiving the compliance report with respect to the election campaign finances of the candidate J. Tizik from the appointed auditor, hearing the representations and reading the written submissions and documentation submitted by the auditor, the committee hereby decides to commence legal proceedings against the candidate for apparent contraventions of the provisions of the Municipal Act relating to election campaign finances. The apparent contraventions outlined in the auditor's report, as well as those matters for which Mr. Tizik failed or refused to comply with the auditor's reasonable requests for information and documentation, are sufficiently serious to compel this committee to decide to commence legal proceedings against Mr. Tizik. We are so compelled because a failure to commence legal proceedings has the potential to undermine the confidence of the electorate in the integrity of the election process and would run contrary to the values of public accountability and transparency set out in the Act. And the committee directs the city clerk to work with the city solicitor to implement this decision, including retaining external legal counsel to have all the usual power and authority of a prosecutor for the purpose of the legal proceedings.
Members, you've heard the motion. All in favor? And I am, so the motion is approved unanimously. Members, I note that Mr. Duchesne is leaving the room as he has reclused himself from advising on the remaining items on the agenda. On the next items, the alleged over contributions by contributors, I would note that invite counsel for the contributor, John Riedel. I understand counsel has a request to make of the committee dealing with candidate Riedel. I expect this will be brief, and perhaps you would like to speak to that matter first, counsel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Roberto Alberto from Gowling WLG. I'm counsel for Mr. Riddle. And yes, we are seeking an adjournment pursuant to Rule 19 of the Rules of Procedure to the December 16th meeting. The particulars of the request are set out in a letter, and I think you all have a copy of it. If you don't, I do have extra copies, but I think you've received that. Mr. Riddle was not served personally with the materials because he was out of town, and he returns to Ottawa tomorrow, so we'll have an opportunity to meet with legal counsel to review his records. All of those things in advance of the meeting, which we submit, are critical and important. Section 88.34 sub 9 of the Municipal Elections Act provides that Mr. Riddle must receive reasonable notice as a contributor, and we submit that has not occurred. And when I say that, I'm not trying to be critical. The process server and city staff were diligent, and I think Mr. Riddle was equally diligent in responding and emailing the process server and retaining counsel. There hasn't been enough time for him to meet, for us to get our ducks in a row, to ensure that there's a full opportunity to respond and provide this committee with the information we submit you need to make a decision on whether or not to proceed with a prosecution. The bottom line is that these are public allegations, and he just is looking for an opportunity to meet with his legal counsel to review records while he's in town. In terms of potential prejudice, it's extremely limited. I mean, you have until December 28th to make sure you're complying with the act. There's a meeting on December 16th. So the potential prejudice to Mr. Riddle is large. The potential prejudice to you folks in fulfilling your obligations is minimal, and accordingly, we ask to adjourn the matter.
You do concede that the service on Mr. Riddell was perfectly proper, and the material was sent to his address of record.
So,
So there's no failing on the part of the city clerk here in delivering these materials. They were with you, I believe, a day later, and so the failure to deliver is hardly an issue.
I would suggest that's not correct, sir. A personal service was attempted on November 28th. Mr. Riddle's assistant reached out on the 29th. He received notice through a letter that was not the comprehensive package on November 29th, and we didn't get that physical package until December 3rd, so just a few days ago. So you can see that there was a bunch of back and forth, and so what I'm saying is, when you try and serve personally with somebody who's not out of town, challenges arrive sometimes, and that's why I'm saying not to be critical, but I'm also saying that from a practical perspective, there hasn't been an opportunity to properly respond.
I have to say it does defeat me a little. I mean, this is not a hanging case, and we do have electronic communications. You've had 3 or 4 days to communicate with your client. I would have thought that there's very little that you couldn't conclude in that time.
Well, respectfully, the rules principally provide for personal service. Part of the reason that one would ask for personal service is the timeliness is extremely critical. A week in terms of these sort of serious allegations is a small period of time. That is kind of within the framework you folks are dealt with, you having 30 days, but you do have 30 days to comply. The rules do contemplate adjournments where it's necessary. To suggest that, there may be physical records, there's due diligence that needs to be completed. So
Rules you keep referring to, what rules are these?
they're your rules of procedure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member have any further questions of council? And if not, does any member see any need to go in camera to deliberate? Yes? All right. One member has indicated a request to go in camera. I expect will be very brief. Does the committee agree to go in camera? Any objections?
I thought we were going to go in camera dealing with all 6 at the same time instead of back and forth.
Well, I think we'll do that on the actual reports that are before us. This is simply a procedural motion, whether or not to grant a deferral of the matter. Still wish to go in camera, or? we just vote on the deferral motion.
I prefer to in-camera deliberation.
Okay. We'll go in camera for a brief period. Thank you.